3 hours after I walked across that stage, my uncle was sitting across from a lawyer trying to take my future. Let that sink in for a second. I had just graduated. Cap, gown, the whole thing. My mother was in the third row crying happy tears before they even called my name. I had worked 4 years for that moment. 4 years of early mornings, late nights, skipped weekends, and every sacrifice a first-generation college student makes when they know failure is not an option. And the second it was over, someone was already moving against me. My name is Maya. I'm 22 years old. I grew up watching my mother Sandra stretch every dollar. She had to make sure I never felt the weight of what we didn't have. No father in the picture. That's what I was told, and for most of my life, I accepted it. Some questions feel too heavy to carry, so you just set them down and keep moving. I kept moving. All the way to a university degree. Before we continue with this video, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. At 19, I found out a trust fund had been established in my name. $2 million, tied to a private foundation called Meridian Legacy, set to release the moment I completed my degree. The university's financial office explained it as a merit-based philanthropic award. I didn't question it too deeply. I was grateful. I focused on earning it. Graduation day was the trigger. So there I was, still in my gown, photos barely taken, when my phone rang. University legal office. Someone had filed a formal contestation against the trust. A claim of legal interest over the funds. They wouldn't give me the name over the phone, but they told me I had 72 hours to respond before a probate hold could freeze everything. I stood there in the middle of a courtyard full of celebrating families and felt the ground shift beneath me. Then I looked up. Across the courtyard, laughing with my cousins, accepting hugs like he'd earned them, was my Uncle Derek. 54 years old. Always well-dressed. Always present at the right moments. Always just a little too interested in how my education was going. Something cold moved through me. Before I could process it, my mother appeared at my elbow. She pulled me away from the crowd, away from the noise, and when I looked at her face, the celebration was completely gone. She looked like a woman who had been dreading this day for years. She said, "I need to tell you something about that money. Something I should have told you a long time ago." And then my phone rang again. The lawyer. I couldn't answer both at once. I had to choose, and whatever I chose, nothing about this day was going to stay the way I imagined it. I let the call go to voicemail. Whatever the lawyer had to say could wait 60 seconds. Because the look on my mother's face told me that what she was about to say had been waiting for 22 years, and I was not going to let it wait one more minute. But before she could get a single word out, Derek appeared. He walked over with that easy smile he always carries, the kind that makes you feel like everything is fine, like he's the most reasonable man in any room. He put one hand on my mother's shoulder and looked at me with what I can only describe as practiced warmth. "Big day, Maya," he said. "You should be proud." I smiled back, because I didn't know yet. Not fully, but something in my body did. My mother said nothing. She just looked at the ground. I excused myself, stepped away, and called the legal office back. They confirmed it plainly. A formal contestation had been filed against the Meridian Legacy Trust, citing a claim of co-trustee authority. The name on the filing was Derek Osei, my own uncle. I stood there turning that over in my mind, trying to make it make sense. Derek had always been the family's unofficial authority on anything financial. When my grandfather passed, Derek handled the estate. When my mother needed help with her mortgage, Derek co-signed. He had built an entire identity around being the person the family turned to when things got complicated. And I had never once questioned it, because why would I? He was family. But now I was thinking back. Last month at a family dinner, Derek had asked me, very casually, almost as an afterthought, which law firm managed my scholarship trust. I told him I wasn't sure of the exact name. He nodded and changed the subject. I forgot about it completely. I wasn't forgetting it now. I thought about something else, too. A conversation I had overheard 2 years ago, late at night at my mother's house. Derek and Sandra in the kitchen, voices low. I only caught the tail end of it. Derek asking, "Has Maya ever asked about her father?" And my mother's voice, sharp and final, "Don't." I never asked her about it. I filed it away with all the other questions I decided were too heavy to carry. I was running out of places to put them. I went looking for Aunt B, my mother's oldest friend, 61 years old and constitutionally incapable of lying to my face. I found her near the parking lot, and before I could even frame the question properly, I just said, "What is Derek doing?" She went very still. Then she said, "Your uncle has been waiting for this day for a long time, baby, and not for good reasons." I asked her what that meant. She shook her head and said, "Ask your mother who set up that trust. Ask her whose name was on the original paperwork." I called my mother immediately. She picked up on the fourth ring, voice hushed and tight, like she was somewhere she didn't want to be overheard. And she said, "The money isn't from a foundation, Maya. It never was. And Derek knows exactly where it came from, because he's the one who helped hide it. The money came from my father, a man I had never met, a man whose name I had never been given, a man who, apparently, had never stopped thinking about me. His name was Charles Amoa, 57 years old, an architect. My mother had been in a serious relationship with him in her late 20s, before I was born, before everything fell apart in ways I was only now beginning to understand. When Sandra became pregnant, Charles wanted to be involved. He wanted to be a father. But my mother's family had other ideas, and the person leading that effort was the same man who had just filed a legal claim against my trust fund. Derek had pushed Sandra to cut ties with Charles before I was ever born. I didn't know why yet, not the full reason, but I could feel the shape of it. And when my mother made that decision, Charles didn't fight it. He accepted the boundary. But he never disappeared completely. When I was 19 and earned my university place, Charles set up the Meridian Legacy Foundation specifically to get money to me. Not to Sandra, he knew she might refuse it. Directly to me, structured as a trust, locked until graduation so no one could touch it, redirect it, or make it disappear. He had spent years building something I didn't even know existed, just to make sure I had a foundation when I stepped into the world. And Derek had known about it for 3 years. 3 years of saying nothing. 3 years of watching me study, watching me work, watching the family celebrate every milestone, while quietly consulting attorneys and building a strategy to intercept the moment the money became real. I sat with all of this in my car, still in my graduation gown, the fabric stiff and ridiculous against the seat, reading through the trust documents the university had emailed me. I read every line. Twice. And then I found it, a clause that made me exhale for the first time in hours. The trust's beneficiary held sole disbursement authority upon degree completion. No co-trustee could override that. No family liaison could supersede it. The only circumstance under which that authority could be challenged was if the beneficiary was declared legally incapacitated. Derek's legal argument had no real foundation, but it didn't need one. Not if I failed to challenge it in time. A probate court filing could freeze the account pending review, and that review could take months. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to stall, to create leverage, to put himself back in the center of a situation he had no right to be in. The clock was already running. 72 hours from the moment that filing landed. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't have a plan. And my mother, the one person with the complete picture, had stopped answering her phone again. I stepped out of the car and looked across the parking lot. The celebration was still happening. Music from someone's car, relatives taking photos, children running between the adults' legs. Normal. Joyful. Completely disconnected from the thing, unraveling 20 feet away from all of it. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text, not a call. 7 words. Don't let Derek intimidate you. CA. I read it 3 times. Then I looked at those initials until they stopped being letters and started being a person. Charles Amoa. My father had just made contact for the first time in my life, and he'd chosen this moment, this day, this crisis, to do it. I stared at those 2 letters for a long time. Then I typed back. Who are you to me? 3 dots appeared immediately, like he had been waiting, phone in hand, for exactly that question. His reply came in pieces, short messages, careful and unhurried, like a man who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times and was still afraid of getting it wrong. He told me his name, He told me he was in the city. He told me he had been at my graduation ceremony. Not close, not where I could have spotted him, but there, watching from the back of the hall while my mother sat in the third row. He had watched me walk across that stage and collect the degree that unlocked everything he had built for me. And then he had watched Derek work the room afterward, shaking hands, laughing loudly, performing the role of proud family patriarch, and he had known exactly what was coming next. Charles had a lawyer. Had retained one the moment Derek's contestation filing appeared in the court system. His legal team had been watching Derek's movements for weeks. I called the number. He picked up on the first ring. I won't pretend that conversation was easy. It wasn't. There is no script for the first time you speak to the father you were told without words to stop wondering about. But Charles was calm. He was direct. He answered every question I asked without deflecting, and the picture that emerged was one that made my chest ache in a way I didn't have a name for yet. He had never stopped. That was the thing. Through every year of my life, through every wall my mother's family built between us, through every silence, he had never stopped. I drove to my mother's house. Sandra opened the door before I knocked. She had been crying. Not fresh tears, the kind that had dried and been replaced and dried again over the course of the afternoon. She looked at me and said, I know everything. We sat in her kitchen, and she told me the rest of it. Derek had pressured her to end things with Charles before I was born, not out of family loyalty, not out of principle. The real reason was money. Their father's estate had been contested at the time, and Derek was managing the process. Charles, as Sandra's partner, represented an outside claim on family assets that Derek couldn't control. So Derek engineered the separation. He framed Charles as unreliable, untrustworthy, wrong for Sandra. And Sandra, young and frightened and surrounded by people who all seemed to agree, believed him. She had spent 22 years believing him. I didn't say anything for a long time after she finished. I just sat there in that kitchen where I had eaten 1,000 meals and done 1,000 homework assignments, looking at my mother, really looking at her, and understanding for the first time that she was also one of Derek's victims. That afternoon, Derek called me directly. His tone was measured, almost gentle. He said he didn't want this to become adversarial. He said I was young and inexperienced with large sums of money, and he only wanted to help manage the first disbursement, just to make sure things were handled properly. He said if I agreed to let him oversee the initial transfer, he would drop the contestation immediately. I kept my voice completely neutral. I told him I would think about it. Then I hung up, opened my phone's voice recorder, and confirmed the recording had captured every word. I forwarded it to Charles's lawyer within the minute. The 72-hour window expired the following morning. Maya appeared before a probate court judge for a brief formal hearing, documents in hand, Charles's legal team at her side. Derek sat across the room with his own attorney, composed, controlled, radiating the quiet confidence of a man who believed he had already won. Then the judge began reviewing the documentation. And somewhere in those first few minutes of reading, Derek's lawyer leaned across and whispered something in his ear. I watched Derek's face. And for the first time in my life, for the first time in perhaps his entire life, his expression broke. The judge didn't need long. She reviewed the trust documentation, the degree completion certificate, the original Meridian Legacy Foundation filings, and the counter-submission from Charles's legal team. She asked Derek's attorney 3 questions. He answered 2 of them confidently and stumbled on the third. Then she set the papers down, looked at the room over her glasses, and dismissed the contestation in its entirety. Derek's claim had no legal standing. It never did. The trust language was unambiguous. Sole beneficiary authority upon degree completion, no co-trustee override, no exceptions outside of legal incapacitation. What Derek had filed was not a legitimate legal challenge. It was a pressure tactic built on the assumption that I wouldn't read the documents carefully enough, wouldn't respond fast enough, and wouldn't have anyone in my corner who knew what they were doing. He was wrong on all 3. The probate hold was lifted. Within 48 hours, the $2 million was fully accessible and legally mine. Charles's attorney submitted the recorded phone call. Derek's offer to drop the claim in exchange for control of the first disbursement, as evidence of attempted financial coercion. That recording changed the nature of everything. What had begun as a civil contestation was now the subject of a formal complaint. Derek did not go to prison. But what happened to him was, in many ways, worse. The complaint became part of the public court record. Word moved through the family the way it always does, fast and without mercy. Aunt B, to her credit, did not slow it down. Relatives who had trusted Derek for decades with financial decisions, estate matters, cosign loans, began asking questions they had never thought to ask before. Two of them quietly retained independent attorneys to review arrangements Derek had managed on their behalf. The family's unofficial financial authority, the identity he had spent 30 years constructing, collapsed in the space of a few weeks. He didn't lose everything, but he lost the thing he had sacrificed everything to protect: his position, his influence, the room full of people who deferred to him without question. He built it on control. And the moment he couldn't control me, it was over. In the courthouse parking lot, Charles was waiting. This was the moment I had been moving toward without knowing it. Not the courtroom, not the legal victory, not the money. This quiet parking lot mid-morning, my graduation gown long since traded for regular clothes, standing in front of a man who looked enough like me that it made my throat tighten. He didn't rush toward me. He stood at a respectful distance and let me close the gap if I chose to. That small thing told me more about him than anything he had said on the phone. I walked over. We stood facing each other, and I did not know what my face was doing. He looked like a man trying very hard not to ask for more than he had earned. He said, "I just wanted to see you graduate, even from a distance." I said, "I know." I didn't hug him. I wasn't ready for that. But I shook his hand, firmly, the way my mother taught me, and I looked him in the eye and said, "I want to hear all of it. The full story. When I'm ready." He nodded. "Just once. Whenever you are." I called Sandra from the car. She answered immediately, voice already unsteady. I told her the contestation was dismissed. I told her Derek's filing would follow him. I told her I was not angry at her. Not in a way that closes doors. I understood, now, that she had been navigated and pressured and kept in the dark just like I had. She had made decisions under conditions Derek designed. That didn't erase everything, but it changed the shape of it. She cried. I let her. 3 weeks later, I sat in a financial advisor's office, one I had chosen myself, vetted myself, with no input from anyone in my family. We built a plan together. A housing fund, a long-term investment portfolio, a separate account set aside specifically for my mother's retirement. Every allocation was intentional. Every decision was mine. On my phone, there was an unread message from Charles. A restaurant recommendation, somewhere quiet, good food, low pressure. No agenda, he wrote. Just a meal. Whenever you're ready. I hadn't replied yet, but I hadn't deleted it either. I put the phone face down on the desk, looked at the numbers in front of me, and got back to work. For the first time in my life, the future felt like something I had built, not something that had been decided for me, hidden from me, or nearly taken from me. It was mine. All of it.